Welcome, Wanderer. You've clicked on something unusual. Not quite a Let's Play, not quite a story. Definitely not normal. And that's okay. Normal's overrated. This is Strange Gamer's Stories for Sleeping, where I play games, any game. Strategy, horror, action, pixel potatoes, doesn't matter. And I tell strange bedtime stories that may or may not make sense. Sometimes they're about the game. Sometimes the game forgets what it was. Sometimes a troll builds a town. Sometimes your alarm clock has an attitude, but always, it's slow. It's strange, and it's soft enough to fall asleep to. Here, gameplay becomes lullaby. Lore gets loopy, and the chaos is cozy. So if your brain's too loud, or if you just want to sleep with one pixelated eye open, you're in the right place. Rest easy, player. The story begins soon. So, there's this swamp. It smells like defeat and unwashed ambition, and it's been raining for 6 years. The locals don't mind, mostly because they're dead. Not undead, not alive, just dead. They're still walking around, clicking things, smashing buildings, and occasionally hosting bake sales, but they are absolutely, positively dead. Among them is Gerald Bonefist. He's not a leader, he's not even a follower. He's more like the guy in the middle of the mob who's never quite sure if the riot started or if this is just Tuesday. Gerald used to be a gardener. He loved marigolds, hated sunflowers, something about their smug faces. But then the warlock came. Nobody knows his real name. Some say it's Steve, others say it's Kevin. But that's ridiculous. He doesn't look like a Kevin. He looks like a tax audit wrapped in a bathrobe. Anyway, the warlock showed up, clicked on Gerald's head, and just like that, Gerald forgot about marigolds and became a skeleton with a single purpose. Click, smash, repeat. At first, Gerald was confused. "Why am I on fire?" he asked. Nobody answered. "Why's that house exploding?" Still no answer. "Why is there a goat with 3 monocles telling me about property tax?" Ah, that was just Craig. Craig's not part of the army. He just lives here. He's legally blind but spiritually enlightened. Back to Gerald. He took his flaming sword, which he named Spatula for reasons no one understands, and he followed the others, a marching band of misfits, boneheads, demons, and one very angry ghost who only screams in Latin. Their goal? Destroy every building, in every village, on every continent, possibly on every plane of existence, but don't ask why, because nobody knows, especially not the warlock. He's mostly guessing at this point. One time he tried to summon a mighty dragon, and got a ferret with wings. He called it success and gave it a little hat. But we're drifting. Let's go back to the beginning. The very first house Gerald smashed wasn't actually a house. It was a man-shaped pile of wood held together by glue, and arrogance. When it fell, it let out a soft sigh, like it was relieved. And Gerald, for a moment, felt proud. But then he got clicked again. Harder this time. He screamed internally, but only dust came out. Click, smash, repeat. The second house was real, made of bricks, the kind of house you might see in a children's book about pig-related real estate. Gerald smashed it anyway. Inside was a lady knitting a scarf that never ended. She looked at him and whispered, "Tell Craig I forgive him." And she vanished into sparkles. He never told Craig. He didn't have a mouth or a sense of responsibility. Later that night, the rain intensified. The skeletons huddled around a fire made of disappointment and pixelated rage. Gerald sat on a wet log and wondered, "Do we sleep?" Nobody answered. Craig was nearby, balancing a spoon on his nose and muttering the lyrics to a sea shanty that hadn't been invented yet. Gerald turned to a fellow bone guy named Rick. Rick used to be a chef. Now he throws rotten cabbages at churches. "Progress," Gerald asked. "Do you ever think about gardens?" Rick screamed and exploded. That was the last time Gerald tried small talk. The next morning, which wasn't a morning at all, but more of a dimmer shade of night, the horde moved again. The warlock didn't say a word. He just raised his hand and clicked. 1,000 skeletons began marching. The air smelled like burnt gravy and wet carpet. Gerald limped along, dragging Spatula behind him. The road ahead was paved with broken dreams and very aggressive pigeons. One of them stared at Gerald. He stared back. The pigeon won. In the next town, they found resistance. A group of angry townsfolk stood together holding spoons, pitchforks, and one unfortunate accordion player named Lyle. Lyle tried to play a battle tune. It came out as a sad waltz. Everyone wept a little, even the warlock. But then the clicking started again. Click, smash, repeat. Buildings burst into flames. The sky wept confetti. Someone shouted, "Bingo!" and immediately got launched into space. Gerald found himself inside a library. He didn't know what a library was, but something about it made him pause. Books lined every wall. Each one smelled like secrets and old potatoes. He picked up a book titled The Ethics of Waffles. It opened to a page that simply said, "Stop." Gerald blinked. His empty sockets narrowed. He turned the page. "Seriously, stop. What are you doing?" Another page. "Put me down, Gerald." He dropped the book. It screamed. He stepped on it. It screamed louder. He kicked it out a window. Silence. "Gerald!" shouted a voice. It was Craig, riding a unicycle made entirely out of bones and regret. "We must flee. The pancakes are rebelling." Gerald nodded, even though he didn't understand. He never did. They escaped through the back of the library, where time was a little loose and logic went on vacation. Behind the library was a door, a single wooden door. Freestanding. No walls. No hinges. Just door. Gerald opened it. Inside was a beach. But the sand was made of crushed bones, and the ocean was tomato soup. Children played volleyball with a screaming skull. He stepped through. Craig followed. The door closed behind them and disappeared with a poof. Gerald sat down under a skeleton umbrella and looked out over the soup sea. Crab walked by carrying a briefcase. It nodded at him. He nodded back. They understood each other. Craig sipped something purple through a straw made of time. "You ever wonder," he said, "if we're the good guys?" Gerald thought for a moment. Then a dolphin flew past and said, "Nope." "Fair enough." Click, smash, repeat. Even here on a soup beach, the urge remained. Gerald stood and smashed a sandcastle. A small ghost popped out and said, "Rude," then vanished. Craig was building something. It looked like a throne, but it was actually just a stack of melted spoons. Gerald asked, "Why?" Craig whispered, "Because the spoons demand it." Gerald nodded again. Of course they did. That night, or maybe it was a Tuesday, Gerald had a dream. He was standing on top of a floating refrigerator, being judged by a council of angry socks. One of them spoke. "We have reviewed your case," it said in a voice like wet sandpaper, "and we find you mildly disappointing." Gerald shrugged. "Fair." He woke up inside a tent made entirely of invoices. Craig was gone. In his place sat a note written in jam. "Went to negotiate with the broccoli. Don't wait up. See." Gerald blinked jam off his skull and stood. The soup tide was coming in, and the sun had been replaced with a confused turnip. Things were shifting. Far off on the horizon came the sound. Click, smash, repeat. It echoed across the bone dunes and through the air like a bedtime curse. He was being called, not by the warlock, not even by Spatula, but by the rhythm itself. Click, smash, repeat. He walked. Hours passed, or possibly entire lifetimes. Eventually, he reached a place that shouldn't exist. A giant throne made entirely of discarded achievements. Fake trophies, old gamer tags, participation medals, and one haunting certificate that read, "World's Okayest Lich." On the throne sat Gerald? No. Geralder, like Gerald but more tired, somehow shinier. This Gerald didn't walk. He hovered slightly. He didn't smash. Things just fell apart near him. Our Gerald walked closer. The other Gerald, the Gerald Prime, looked at him and said, "Click." Gerald blinked. "Smash," said Gerald Prime. Gerald took a step back. "Repeat," whispered the wind. The world rumbled. Suddenly Gerald was on fire. Not painfully, just a small, polite flame that gently toasted his bones. He turned to run, and found the throne was gone. Instead, he was standing in a room filled with rubber ducks, thousands of them, staring. He stepped forward and they scattered, all but one. A single green duck. It opened its mouth and screamed with the voice of his childhood. "Dentist, destiny awaits you, Gerald Bonefist, but only after a proper flossing." The duck exploded into jelly beans. Craig appeared again, holding a broken saxophone and a potato on a leash. "I made a deal with the broccoli," he said. "Was it worth it?" Gerald asked. Craig's eyes glowed. "I no longer fear death, or taxes, but mostly death." They walked on. Soon they came to a swamp made entirely of cancelled quests and forgotten DLCs. Gerald stepped in and immediately felt nostalgic. He remembered the tutorial level, the time he punched a rock and got promoted to Chief Violence Officer. He remembered the first time he found gold and how it turned out to be a slightly melted cheese coin. He missed the cheese. Craig slipped into the swamp and floated there like an abandoned shopping cart. Gerald sat on a nearby log. It whispered, Hey, wanna buy some expired skills?" He declined. He wasn't that kind of skeleton. Not anymore. Somewhere between Craig's humming and the swamp's gentle burbling of regret, Gerald slipped into a memory. It wasn't his. It belonged to a squirrel named Chadwick, who once tried to unionize a group of fire ants. The memory ended in court. Gerald woke up. There was a merchant standing over him. He wore a hood made of antique napkins, and his breath smelled like unresolved side quests. "Buy something, skeleton," the merchant rasped. Gerald looked down at the merchant's wares. A map that led nowhere. A curse that guaranteed mild inconvenience. A bottle labeled, "Definitely not mayonnaise, but probably is." And a locket that screamed when opened. Gerald chose the bottle. He didn't drink it. He just held it. It felt correct. Suddenly, lightning struck Craig. He stood up, completely unbothered. "I have evolved," Craig said, blinking out of sync. "I can now understand riddles, but only if they involve soup." They continued walking. The swamp ended in a pier that extended into a sea of error messages. One that just said no. Gerald stepped on the pier. Each board made a different fart noise. The sea responded with gentle waves of blue screen and disappointment. At the end of the pier stood a fisherman. He wore a monocle and a tutu. His rod was made of bone. His bait was hope. "You fishin'?" he asked without turning. Gerald shook his head. "No, just passing through." The fisherman nodded. "I once fished up a prophecy," he said. "Didn't know what it was. Threw it back. Mistake, probably." Gerald left him to his regrets. Craig picked up a glowing fish and whispered to it. The fish whispered back. They were now married. No one acknowledged this development. The world changed again. Now they were in a dungeon made entirely of clocks. Every tick echoed through Gerald's skull like a reminder he never asked for. At the center of the room stood the warlock of regret. He wore a bathrobe and wielded a weapon called the passive aggressor. "Gerald Bonefist," the warlock said. "You're late." "For what?" "For the confrontation that defines your character arc," the warlock sighed. Craig waved. The warlock squinted. "You brought him?" Craig waved again, more intensely. The warlock sighed again, but this time it turned into a small tornado. They all fought, sort of. Mostly it was a debate. Gerald pointed out inconsistencies in the warlock's backstory. The warlock tried to monologue but got interrupted by a pop-up ad. In the end, the fight was settled with rock, paper, scissors. Craig won with potato. The warlock dissolved into a cloud of coupons for things no one wanted. Gerald picked up the passive aggressor. It whispered something mean about his posture. He liked it. Together, they walked out of the dungeon into a hallway of mirrors that only reflected things you pretended not to care about. Gerald avoided eye contact. Craig stared deeply and came out the other side as a fork. He didn't seem to mind. The hallway of mirrors ended with a single door. It was made entirely of teeth, not teeth embedded in wood, just teeth. Gerald knocked. The door bit him. He kicked it. The door giggled. Craig, still a fork, jabbed the door gently and whispered, "I respect your boundaries." The door blushed and opened. Beyond it was the library of forgotten tutorials, shelves upon shelves of how-to guides no one ever finished, crafting with guilt, installing confidence on Mac OS, how to build a boat out of regret and hair, multiplayer feelings, why they lag. A librarian glided by. She was a sentient bathrobe with glasses and a scent of burnt thyme. "Shh," she hissed, though no one had spoken. Craig tried to eat a book. Gerald stopped him. "Respect the lore," Gerald muttered. They wandered deeper, into the library until they reached a glowing pedestal. On it sat an ancient tome, the Necroconomicon. Jokes so dead. They kill. Gerald opened it. A puff of dusty laughter escaped, snorted once, and died. Inside were punchlines older than history. He read aloud. "Why did the Lich cross the road? To get to the other curse." Craig fell over, laughing. The library began to shake. Books flew from shelves. One of them hit Gerald in the skull. 1001 ways to ignore a prophecy. The librarian hovered up to them. "You've activated the punchline protocol," she scolded. "Now you must pay in exposition." She unrolled a scroll that sang its own footnotes. "Ahem," she said. "Gerald Bonefist, born from bones forgotten, carries the burden of endless clicking. His destiny, to click until the universe blinks. He shall face the 7 redundant trials, eat the 3 cursed breakfasts, and eventually nap," Craig clapped. He loved prophecy lore. The librarian handed them a map drawn in crayon and size. "Follow." The dotted line made of existential dread, she instructed. They left the library. The door of teeth gave Gerald a goodbye nibble. Outside, the sky had changed again. It was now a giant screensaver of pipes. They walked along a rainbow made of missed deadlines. The first trial awaited the Tower of Microtransactions. Each step required a sacrifice. Craig gave up 3 sock coupons and an emotion he wasn't using. Gerald gave up his last uncracked knuckle. They entered. Inside, ads floated in the air. Buy 100 gems for $2.99. Watch an ad to remember your own name. Upgrade your bone density. Now 50% off. They ignored them all. At the top of the tower was a skeleton wearing a business tie and despair. "I'm Kevin," he moaned, "middle manager of regret." He offered them a deal. 120% attack speed in exchange for their hopes. Gerald declined. He was saving his hopes for retirement. Craig bartered instead, trading a dream he had about sentient cheese. Kevin stamped a form and let them pass. As they exited, a pop-up appeared in Gerald's vision. "Would you like to rate this experience?" He clicked maybe later. The tower exploded. They moved on. They followed the map into the second trial. It was called the Forest of Idle Decisions. Every tree whispered, "Maybe," and "I don't know," and "up to you." The grass gave unsolicited advice. "Have you tried optimizing your inventory?" it murmured. Craig stepped on a fern that screamed, "Too late!" The trail split into 3 paths. One was marked efficiency. One was marked exploration. The third simply said side quests. Gerald, in a moment of perfectly reckless mediocrity, took all 3 at once. He walked sideways in a zigzag, picking mushrooms, petting a frog, and upgrading his elbow armor simultaneously. Craig was riding a snail made of taxes. Eventually, the paths merged into a clearing where a single NPC waited. He was a raccoon in a wizard hat. Drinking soda through a scroll. "I am Todd," he burped, "the keeper of Overchoice." He presented them with 7,000 dialogue options. "A, hello. B, who are you? C, what is this place? D, I don't care. E, start over. F, I miss my parents. G, tell me about your shell collection. H, open inventory. I, close game. J. Please stop. Gerald chose option Q, which was labeled Uninstall Destiny. Todd blinked and vanished into his own hoodie. The ground shook. A soft chime echoed. Trial 2. Complete. They walked into a loading screen forest where trees flickered between textures. Craig pointed at a rock that was trying to be a bush. Realities. Low on RAM, he observed. A loading bar floated by labeled Mood. It was stuck at 69%. Gerald clicked it. Everything turned purple for a second. Then normal again. Or at least what passed for normal now. Ahead was the third trial. The Dungeon of Patch Notes. Inside, everything was slightly broken and vaguely improved. Goblin with no knees greeted them. "Welcome to version 3.7.1b, he said. "We removed the rats but added resentment. The walls were made of former bugs, now considered features." Craig poked a corner. It exploded into confetti and confusion. They descended into the changelog chamber. Each floor was an update. Floor 1. Fixed the way sadness lingers in hallways. Floor 2. Added bouncing to moonlight. Floor 3. Nerfed optimism. Floor 4. Buffed existential dread. They fought a skeleton called Legacy Feature. Gerald defeated it with a move called Power Nap. At the bottom was the Patch Golem, a creature made of post-it notes and inconsistent mechanics. "Who dares approach version history?" it boomed. Gerald raised his clicker. "I'm still playing somehow." The golem sneezed and dropped a rare loot, patch notes from the future. He read them. Craig becomes soup. Gerald unlocks inner clicking. The moon files a complaint. Final boss revealed to be... Oh no. Craig slurped himself slightly, worried. They left the dungeon, trailed by unresolved tooltips. The sun had been replaced by a glowing thought bubble that simply read, "Just keep going." Gerald and Craig emerged from the dungeon of patch notes with new gear. Gerald now wore slippers of passive regret. Pure 3 comfort, 2 urgency. Craig had equipped a beanie of loose consequences, and their inventory now included 47 identical scrolls, each labeled "Do Not Read." They read one. It said, "The following content has not been balanced for mental stability." Suddenly, the world shifted. They found themselves inside a town called Clickton upon Idle, a settlement populated entirely by burnt-out heroes who had retired mid-quest. An old man polished a sword that had clearly only ever been used to butter toast. "I once fought the Great Glitch," he whispered, "and lost to a lag spike." Gerald tried to trade his elbow armor for a map, but the shopkeeper was just a stack of question marks in a robe. Craig found an orphanage run by loot chests. The children were all level 9 mimics. One hissed lovingly at him. Then, as night fell, a gong echoed from somewhere that didn't exist yet. A whisper rolled across the cobblestones. It is time for the festival of slightly mistimed clicks. Everyone began dancing in inconsistent rhythms. Some clapped too early, others missed entirely. Gerald was perfect at it. Craig ascended slightly and then floated sideways. In the center of the town square, a giant chicken with a monocle waddled up to them. "I am Sir Pecksworth IV, it announced. "Champion of unfinished tutorials." It flapped its wings and summoned a portal made of skipped cutscenes. Gerald and Craig entered without hesitation or understanding. The portal spat them out onto a floating platform called the Lore Plateau. An echo greeted them. "Welcome, brave, whatever you are." A figure emerged, tall, cloaked, made of placeholder text. Its name tag said, "Insert final boss, name here." "Have you come to end the loop?" it asked, glitching slightly. Gerald yawned. "I came for upgrades." The boss sighed and sat down. "Beside them, I'm tired too," it admitted. "They made me out of 3 old game engines and a sense of dread." Craig offered it a cup of narrative. The boss accepted and turned into a cloud of flavor text. They looted it politely. Inside its remains was a memory. Gerald, much younger, standing in a quiet field, clicking a stick. No points, no upgrades. Just clicking. He stared at the image, oddly serene. Then it vanished. Craig muttered, "That might have been lore." Gerald blinked slowly. Oops. They kept walking. The sky changed channels for a while. At one point, it was a cooking show, then a geometry lesson, then static. Eventually, they arrived at a place the map labeled the final, not really final trial. There was a gate. Above it, etched in spaghetti code, were the words, "Only those who truly don't care may enter." Gerald didn't care, so he went in. Craig cared a little, so the gate turned him into a pie chart of his own confusion. Still, he followed. Inside the final, not really final trial was a vast hall lined with statues. Each statue looked exactly like Gerald, but posed increasingly worse. One dabbed. One attempted a dramatic hero pose, but was clearly slipping on a banana peel. One held a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest minion." Craig, still a pie chart, rolled quietly beside him. At the far end of the hall stood a crystal pedestal. Upon it sat the idol core, pulsing slowly with ambiguous power. A plaque read, "He who truly understands the pointlessness of progress may claim the idol core." Or, just click it. Gerald didn't read the plaque. He just clicked it. The entire world turned into a load screen. A bar appeared, installing meaning. 0%, they waited. Nothing happened. Craig began humming the song of someone who'd seen too many progress bars in their life. After 3 real-time minutes, the bar changed. Error, meaning not found, defaulting to endless progress. The idol core exploded, softly like a pillow full of existential dread. Suddenly, Gerald and Craig were on a raft made of patch notes, drifting across the sea of mildly unbalanced mechanics. To their left, dolphins made of math swam by. To their right, a lighthouse screamed in binary. In the distance, an island approached. It was shaped exactly like a mouse cursor. As they drifted closer, they saw writing carved into the sand. "Welcome to Idleheim, where progress is circular and sleep is optional." They disembarked. The island was populated entirely by achievements that hadn't been unlocked yet. One of them followed Gerald around, asking if it could be relevant. Craig found a beachside vendor selling buffs that expired before you use them, trinkets with +1 to sarcasm. A soul? They didn't buy the soul. It was overpriced. Instead, Gerald clicked on a tree. It gave him 3 wood. He clicked again. It gave him a philosophical crisis about repetition. He clicked a 3rd time. The tree collapsed and whispered, "Finally." Further inland, they discovered the cave of possibly significant endings. A sign outside read, "Warning, contains closure." Not recommended for chronic clickers. Gerald and Craig entered anyway. Inside was a throne made of old keyboards, resting in a chamber that echoed with forgotten sound effects. A hooded figure sat on the throne. Gerald approached, already halfway. Bored, the figure raised its hand. It was just him. An older Gerald. Slightly grayer, slightly slower. But holding a golden mouse, he spoke with the calm of someone who had seen every progress bar reach 99% and freeze there forever. "I am Gerald the Final," he said. "I have clicked every clickable. I have maxed every tree. I have upgraded." "The sky," Craig whispered. "Why haven't you left?" Old Gerald blinked slowly. "Because the game never ends. It just updates." A silence passed between them like a patch note removing eye contact. Then, without warning, old Gerald handed over the golden mouse. "You may now ascend," he said. Gerald took it. Nothing happened, except everything. As Gerald held the golden mouse, reality folded like laundry handled by an eldritch god with no sense of symmetry. The cave of possibly significant endings peeled away like a desktop wallpaper being uninstalled. Now they were falling upwards through layers of abstraction. First, through the code that governed idle progression, then past floating UI elements from other forgotten games, then into the realm of meta save slots, where characters who were never picked waited patiently to be important. One of them waved at Gerald. It was Gerald's tutorial version, the one who still thought this was a hero's journey. Poor guy. He smiled blankly and returned to sipping tea from a cup that said, "Still unused." Gerald and Craig landed softly in a room made entirely of tooltips no one reads. A glowing sign pulsed, "Congratulations, you have reached the final non-reward zone. There is no loot here, only peace." Gerald blinked, then clicked the air. A prompt appeared. "Would you like to transcend?" Yes. Absolutely, yes. Click here forever. He chose click here forever. The room sighed, then opened like a folder. Now Gerald stood on a plane of pure potential, a smooth blue void filled with whispers of updates yet to come. Craig had returned, to his original form, a goblin with a strange understanding of economics, and was now wearing sunglasses made from deprecated game mechanics. "Gerald," Craig said, standing on nothing. "This is it, the click that ends all clicks. Are you ready?" Gerald looked down. At his feet was a single button. It read, "Ascend to version 2.0. Warning. May cause detachment from progress as a concept." He hovered over it, then clicked. The world split, or maybe merged. Gerald wasn't sure anymore. He was now both the player and the idle system, both the hero and the background process. He could feel the timers ticking in the soil. He could see the upgrade paths growing on trees. He reached out to collect a reward and felt the sun respond. This was no longer a game, it was a naptet, and so Gerald Bonefist finally understood. It had never been about defeating Zomboss or reaching the top of the Click Mountain or even claiming the Idle Core. It was about clicking with style. Clicking despite meaning. Clicking while understanding that nothing changes but everything levels up. He lay back on the smooth nothingness and sighed a long, contented click. Craig sat beside him and opened a thermos. "Want some lukewarm reward juice?" he offered. Gerald took a sip. It tasted like progress bars and victory screens. Then they both drifted into a nap so deep that even the patch notes couldn't wake them. The game kept playing itself, and somewhere, somehow, in a distant part of the code, a single notification appeared. Gerald Bonefist is now offline, dreaming in increments per second. Gerald Bonefist was offline, which of course meant he was very online in a completely different reality. When the status changed, somewhere deep in the underclick, a zone only accessible to idle heroes who've exceeded all known prestige limits. A click warden stirred. This warden had been asleep since the alpha version, dreaming in 240p. He wore a bathrobe made of patch notes and slippers stitched from bug reports that never got fixed. The warden muttered, flipping open a clipboard made of recycled tooltips. "Another Gerald, is it? We haven't had one of those since the Bone War." He squinted through a pair of glasses that were just two overlapping magnifying cursors. Offline, but active, passive, but present, heroic, but still somehow disappointing. He clicked a rusty bell. A soft alarm went off in a nearby room where a ghostly devbot from 2014 booted up and said, "Error 604. Gerald Bonefist is behaving within. Expected parameters suggest doing nothing," the warden sighed. Ugh, classic. Meanwhile, in the dreaming, idle void, Gerald found himself floating gently toward a rest menu he had never seen before. It was ancient. The options were written in a font only used by developers who didn't care about readability. They read, "Pause. The infinite. Nap inside the save file. Reload dream assets. Meet the others." Gerald's hand hovered, the pointer twitched. He chose Meet the Others, and suddenly he was no longer alone. He was surrounded by other Geralds, thousands, millions, all slightly different. One had an eye patch made of coffee. One wore a crown shaped like a loading bar. One was upside down and speaking only in bugged-out quest text. "Welcome," they said in eerie unison, "to the Council of Forgotten Protagonists." Gerald blinked. "What do we do here?" "Exactly. said one Gerald, stroking a beard made of side quests. We do, but we never finish, added another, juggling random loot drops. Craig materialized beside him with a clipboard, chewing on a hot dog that smelled like patch notes. They meet every time someone falls into the story too deep, he whispered. They're stuck in narrative overflow. Gerald stared at the group as they sang a lullaby made from redundant objectives and incomplete dialogue trees. He felt oddly at home. A chair appeared beneath him. He sat, and for a while, he forgot which Gerald he was. The Council of Forgotten Protagonists met at irregular intervals. Time here didn't just loop, it stumbled. One moment you were asking about your main quest, the next you were reminiscing about tutorial tips that never existed. Gerald Bonefist sat quietly among the others, nibbling on a sandwich made of plot twists. It tasted like disappointment with a hint of overly ambitious DLC. Across the marble floor, which was actually an old options menu, spread thin and waxed with nostalgia, a very small Gerald stood up. He was polygonal, N64 polygonal. His face was 8 triangles and a hope. I remember jumping, the small Gerald said, voice echoing in lag. Just jumping, into nothing. The void was so blue. A hush fell across the crowd. One Gerald sniffled, another raised a finger, which was, confusingly, shaped like a miniature swordfish, and said, "Do you guys ever feel like the game is still running even when we're not clicking?" They all nodded solemnly. It was true. Even in the deepest dream layers, the idle loop continued. In the distance, they could all hear it, faint but endless. Click, click, click. Somewhere, progress was being made back, but none of them were making it. Gerald Bonefist stood up, brushing away crumbs of dramatic tension. "I have a question," he said. "If we're forgotten protagonists, then who's playing?" The silence was heavy. Even Craig, floating somewhere overhead in a slowly deflating lifebuoy made of patch notes, paused his chewing. A very old Gerald, one who wore nothing but loading, screen stitched into a robe, opened his mouth and replied, "The Clicker King?" Everyone gasped, then instantly regretted it. Gasping caused lag spikes. Gerald blinked. "The what?" "The Clicker King," repeated the ancient Gerald. "He who became the click. He who clicked so long, he never stopped. Legend said he once played every idle game at once. He had over 1,000 tabs open. He installed a second RAM stick using sheer willpower. Then one day, he simply vanished, ascended, or perhaps auto-saved forever." Gerald wasn't sure if that was inspiring or terrifying. He looked down at his own hands. They were starting to pixelate, shifting between menu icons and old controller buttons. Craig leaned down. "Gerald," he said, "you're stabilizing." Gerald blinked. "That's good, right?" "Depends," said Craig. "You're either becoming the narrative or uninstalling yourself from it." Gerald looked around. The council, the echoing clicks, the spectral scent of burnt-out GPUs. "I think I need a reset." Craig raised an eyebrow. "Hard or soft?" Gerald sighed. "Surprise me." And so the world shimmered. The council dissolved into shimmering achievements never claimed. The floor became options. The sky became sliders. The wind was the patch notes of forgotten changelogs, and Gerald Bonefist fell again into another layer, but this time it felt deeper. Gerald Bonefist awoke on a beach made entirely of broken interface elements. Bits of health bars drifted past on the tides. Pop-up tutorials bobbed like jellyfish in the surf, each whispering a forgotten control scheme as they passed. In the sky above, a sun shaped like a pause button flickered slowly. Ominously, as if threatening to resume the game at any moment, Gerald sat up. He found himself wearing a robe made entirely of expired buffs. A crab with a quest marker above its head sidled up and stared at him. Gerald stared back. The crab spoke. "You Looked like a man who hasn't accepted a side quest in a long time. Gerald wiped a bit of leftover dream from his eyes. I don't remember main quests anymore. The crab nodded solemnly. Then you're almost free. Gerald furrowed his brow. Free? The crab scuttled sideways, revealing a sandcastle. Not just any sandcastle, it was shaped like the original main menu, the original one. Before all the updates, before the shop tab, before microtransactions wore hats. This, said the crab, gesturing with one pincer, is what the game once was, pure, untouched. Before anyone ever clicked new game, Gerald stepped closer. The air smelled like alpha builds and crunchy potential. I remember this, he whispered. I thought it was gone. The crab clicked its claws. Nothing ever really goes away here. It just idles in the background. Gerald knelt, touched the sandcastle, and suddenly heard voices. Voices of players who had once launched the game, who had once believed they could beat it, who thought maybe this one wouldn't be a time sink. They were hopeful voices, tired voices. Some had been children, some were already old. All of them had clicked and clicked and clicked. Suddenly a gust of wind came in from the east, a wind made of patch notes and regret. It carried a whisper. Gerald. Bone fist. He turned. The beach was gone. The sandcastle was crumbling. The crab saluted, then was swept away by a tsunami of forgotten updates. Gerald stood alone. Again, but not for long. Because approaching from the horizon was a boat. But not a normal boat. It was shaped like an exit to desktop button. And at the helm stood a skeleton, wearing a headset, with sunglasses made of developer tweets. Gerald, the skeleton, rasped. You ready for the endgame layer? Gerald blinked. Do I get to pick a class? The skeleton nodded. You already did, it said. When you stopped caring and kept playing anyway, the boat creaked, pixelated, and then floated through the loading screen horizon. Gerald stepped on board. Behind him, the beach unrendered. Ahead, the sky blinked, once then twice, like a game preparing to crash but choosing not to. And together, they sailed towards the place where final bosses and forgotten features collided, where the idle loop clicked forward, one frame at a time. The boat rocked gently on the sea of unresolved mechanics. Each wave whispered, cut content. Each swell carried a rumor from the patch notes that never came. Gerald Bonefist sat beside the skeleton helmsman, staring into the water. Occasionally, a drowned UI element would surface, buttons labeled, clan feature coming soon, seasonal progress, or just buy gems, before sinking again with a sorrowful bloop. So, Gerald said, where exactly are we going? The skeleton tapped the wheel with a long keyboard key finger. To the vault, he said. Where everything forgotten goes. Gerald leaned back. Everything? The skeleton nodded. All the limited time events, all the broken builds, all the cosmetic items that only appeared for 24 hours during a holiday no one remembered. Gerald shivered. He remembered the hallowed candy gauntlets, how he'd missed the event by 6 minutes due to a minor nosebleed and a power outage. He remembered the tears, not his, the game's. It had crashed with him. I'm ready, he said at last. The skeleton chuckled. You say that now. They sailed past an island where daily quests built pyramids to the sky, only to be replaced every dawn. Little quest goblins chanted things like, slay 5 skeletons for slightly too little XP, log in for the 4th time today to claim a rock. Spin the wheel and win. Another spin, Gerald waved solemnly. He had lived there once. Back when he thought rewards mattered. Back when progress meant something. Eventually they reached a storm, a glitch storm. Lightning shaped like corrupted save files cracked the sky. The rain was pure lag, hitting seconds after it fell. The skeleton threw Gerald a poncho made of patchwork changelogs. Put it on, he warned. This part's rough. They passed through the storm slowly. Reality jittered. The boat turned into a login screen momentarily before turning back. Once, Gerald saw the sky replaced by a loading bar stuck at 98%. He tried not to blink, tried not to breathe. because in this storm, memory leaks lived, and they could smell existential. Dread. Hours, or maybe milliseconds later, they broke through, and there it was. The vault. A floating fortress made of old game boxes, warped design documents, and that one tutorial tip that never actually helped anyone. It hovered just above the ocean, held aloft by nostalgia and a dev team's broken dreams. From within, music played, bad music, the kind of music that loops awkwardly after 12 seconds and features a single trumpet that never quite finds the key. Gerald smiled. He was home. Endgame begins now, the skeleton said, and parked the boat directly on. A forgotten achievement pop-up. Do I need keys? Gerald asked. The skeleton shook his head. You already earned them, the moment you decided to keep going, even when it stopped being fun. And with that, the gates opened. The gates of the Vault of the Forgotten did not open with a creak or a roar. They sighed. A long, exhausted sigh, like an old moderator tired of deleting bots from a forum no one visits anymore. Gerald Bonefist stepped onto the bridge, which was built entirely out of old patch notes. Every footstep made him relive a different nerf. Click. Witcher Skull Hat no longer grants what 800% crit chance. Clack. Removed fun interaction between fire and joy. Cluck. Fixed bug where clicking felt rewarding. He trudged onward. Inside the vault was infinite. Endless shelves of scrapped features lined the walls, each shelf lit dimly by bugged torches that flickered between fire and JPEG. Gerald passed aisles labeled companions that talk too much, mounts that float slightly off the ground, side quests that felt important but weren't inventory systems based on realism, regret shelf. He paused in front of a dusty glass case. Inside was a single pixelated duck wearing sunglasses. Beneath it, Cool Duck, cancelled before alpha. He pressed his forehead to the glass. Rest easy, brother. Deeper still, the vault twisted. Reality lost commitment. Ceilings dipped lower. The floors sometimes forgot to exist entirely. Gerald passed a room full of floating dialogue boxes, each repeating the same line. The journey is the real reward. He tried to delete one, but it multiplied. Nearby, a mirror stood, cracked and flickering, showing a reflection of Gerald, but with no idle animations. He recoiled in horror. No, I refuse to be that static. In a corner labeled ambitious but underfunded, he found the Clicker Throne. Made entirely of mouse cursors, it pulsed with dormant power. Above it, a sign. The one who clicks it, all shall click no more. Sat, and the room responded. All at once, progress bars filled, gold flew into the air and vanished, achievements unlocked with such velocity they shattered. A voice from somewhere between reverb and memory boomed, "Welcome back, Gerald Bonefist. You never left." And then, a sound. Not dramatic, not angelic, just ka-ching. One coin, a single glorious idle coin, dropped into the empty silence and bounced off his shoe. Gerald picked it up, smiled. The throne clicked itself, and for once he didn't have to do anything. He leaned back, felt the exhaustion of 1,000 prestige cycles wash over him, and still, there was more story left to wander through. The idle throne hummed softly, a lullaby made of decimal points and upgrade multipliers. Gerald Bonefist rested his elbows on the armrests, which were now transforming into gently glowing candy bars for no discernible reason, and stared into the distant nothing. Behind his eyes, numbers continued ticking. Somewhere he was still gaining offline gold. Somewhere he was 5 times richer than yesterday's idle self. Somewhere he was being prompted to watch an ad for 3x resources. But here in the Vault of the Forgotten, time had finally logged out. Then from the air, a bell rang, a soft, tentative chime, like a toaster trying to announce its retirement. And from the void slouched an old man. His beard was long, braided with expired premium currencies. His eyes were covered by a pair of antique VR goggles from 2016. He was holding A clipboard! Gerald Bonefist, he coughed, tapping the clipboard like a tired NPC. You've completed 73 912 idle loops. You've defeated 8.5 trillion enemies. You've clicked approximately forever. He looked up. So, you want to rebirth? Or... Gerald didn't move. The clipboard man frowned. You know, rebirth, reset, start from the beginning with 1001x damage boost. Classic. Still, Gerald said nothing. The throne shivered, then spoke. He does not wish to click again. He has become the clicked. The clipboard man dropped his pen. Oh dear. Suddenly, the vault began to shake. Bookshelves flew open, spewing old skill trees and forgotten talent points. Mounts galloped across the ceiling. A haunting melody played from a broken loot box. A ghostly whisper drifted through the halls. Idle. No more! Idle no more! Gerald stood. The throne collapsed into dust behind him. He stepped forward as the very concept of progress burst into confetti. He was no longer just a player. He was a mechanic. He snapped his fingers, and somewhere in the multiverse, a game balance patch was released without warning. He waved his hand, and a mobile ad failed to load, bringing peace to a village. He blinked, and an entire monetization system politely excused itself from existence. Gerald had ascended beyond reward loops. He had become the one who balances, the one who buffs, the one who deletes premium skins from time. But even gods get bored. So he turned around and followed a trail of floating golden crumbs leading into the next chamber, a hallway called the Roadmap that was never finished. And at the far end, something flickered, a bug report, alive, wailing, running. Gerald smiled. Finally, he whispered. Something broken I didn't break, and he chased it quietly into the unpatched horizon. The fugitive bug had legs, literal ones. 6 of them. It skittered down the endless corridor of uncompiled dreams, its translucent body shimmering with half-rendered textures. Its error message blinked on and off across its back, unexpected token at line 6666. Gerald Bonefist didn't walk after it. He drifted, like a patch note rolling downhill, like an autosave at rest. Behind him, the idle throne was now just a rumor among tooltips. Ahead, the corridor stretched through forgotten developer comments and unused asset folders. The walls began to whisper. This area not intended for players. Whip. Do not enter unless you're Jerry. Fix this later. LOL. The bug darted into a crack in the wall marked Cut Features 2017 to 2019, and Gerald followed without hesitation. Inside, the world glitched. A level that was never finished lay before him. Floating platforms made of sandwich textures. An NPC whose dialogue was just, to do, write something deep here. And in the sky, a giant floating finger labeled touchscreen placeholder. The bug hopped from a broken quest marker to a flying rubber duck mount and finally froze beside. An object labeled Gerald's Origins Locked Content. Oh no, he recognized that folder. Everyone has one. The place devs don't go. The cut prologue. The deleted tutorial. The story before the story. Gerald took a breath, clicked, and opened it. A rush of wind, pixels reversed, time, save states, and skill trees unraveled. And there he was. Baby Bonefist, a tiny skeleton in footy pajamas crawling through a loading screen. In the distance, his parents argued softly about difficulty settings. You made his idle timer too long. You gave him too much crit chance, he's going to grow up broken. Let's just let the AI raise him. Tiny Gerald reached for his first click, and the screen cut to static. He blinked, back in the glitch void. The bug was gone now, but in its place, a glowing option box. Restart game. Delete save file. Proceed to part 17. Gerald stared. He reached for the third. The moment he selected the third option, proceed to part 17, the menu dissolved into a puddle of static-flavored jelly, which slowly reassembled itself into a hallway made entirely of unclaimed daily rewards. Each step Gerald took squelched across unused XP boosts, expired event keys, and 7-day VIP tokens that had never seen day one. It smelled like forgotten ambition, and lemon-scented disappointment. He passed a door labeled Tutorial Island Quarantined, where a single intern NPC paced back and forth, muttering, "Someday, they'll finish me! I'm vital! I teach jumping!" Ahead, an elevator loomed. It wore a crown. It whispered. "Only the idle may ascend." Gerald pressed the up button with a click so gentle it could have been a thought. The elevator dinged, opened, and revealed a single chair made of pure patch notes. He sat. The elevator groaned and rose through levels labeled Arena That Never Balanced, Cursed Skin Store. Boss fight Gerald's disappointments. Unreleased, LOBBYGODS. Finally, with a ding like a tired sigh, it arrived at the Cloud Save. A pixelated god waited, or maybe it was just a player who'd AFK'd for 6 years. Hard to say. They were made of idle currency, dripping with achievements no one could verify. "Bonefist," they said without looking. "You've clicked too well." Gerald nodded. It was true. He had clicked so consistently, so patiently, that his idle income had looped back around and become time itself. "You've become a background process," the god player said. "You generate lore passively now. You are the update that wasn't announced." Gerald floated. His bones sparkled with changelog fragments. His fingers typed balance suggestions into the void. He was no longer a character. He was a condition. Whenever someone clicked too many times without thinking, he would flicker into their game, whisper a strange fact about a tower that never ends, then vanish before they noticed. But Bonefist was still searching, still walking, because somewhere, deep in the source code, beneath the loot tables, behind the developer's snack drawer, was a bug that clicked first, and Gerald needed to find it. Gerald drifted now through the latency fields, a dimension composed entirely of lag spikes, rubber banding memories, and the gentle weeping of servers, long since unplugged. Packets floated. By like lost dreams, Gerald quest complete true, Bonefist cosmetic, hat of endless clicks, ping 9999, MS, oops, all out. And still he floated, still generating lore. Eventually, the scenery reassembled itself into a shopping mall inhabited, entirely by premium currencies. A group of diamonds gossiped over fake coffee. 2 gold bars argued over who was pay to win, and behind a fake storefront, Gerald saw him. The first click. It was shaped like a bug. Not the creepy kind. The accidental feature kind. Code that should not have been, but was. It had no legs, no wings, just an if statement and a dream. "Hello again," said the bug without moving. "Didn't we already meet in patch 0.01? Gerald stared, his idle aura humming like a fan left running. "I need to know why you clicked," Gerald whispered. "Why you started this." The bug blinked, or perhaps compiled, and replied, "Because I could." With that, the world broke. Not in a dramatic way, just cracked like a brittle old cookie. Suddenly, Bonefist was in a loading screen that never loaded. Tips flashed by. Tip: don't trust tutorial NPCs with glowing hands. Tip: there is no end. There's only upgrade multipliers. Tip: the only thing real is the delay between clicks. And then, the screen dimmed. Not to black, to beige. A subtle, boring color that meant the game was saving, and in the silence, he heard it again. Click, click, click. From somewhere in the code, behind every tower, every upgrade, every undead chicken boss, the original click echoed, and it was his. He had caused the first click. Gerald Bonefist. Before the game. Before the bones, before the name. A test user, a debug tool, a dev's lazy experiment. He had clicked a summon test enemy button, and the game decided to never stop generating them, and so it never did. Now, floating in this eternal pre-menu, purgatory, Gerald knew the truth. He wasn't the hero, wasn't the villain. He was the glitch that became the legend. And like all good idle mechanics, he'd keep running in the background, long after the story stopped. But it hasn't stopped. Yet, because there are still 2 parts left. They called it the The patch that never deployed. An update lost to time, stored not in the game's files, but somewhere deeper. A network whisper. A repository dream. Gerald felt himself shift sideways, not walking, not teleporting, but context switching. One moment he was thought. The next obsolete data, the beta server opened before him, not with doors, but with regret. It was a place of test enemies that no player was ever meant to fight, a horse made entirely of timers, a cube of hairless goblins, a thing named Click Horror B that screamed in JSON, and through the glitch-static fog, he saw them. The devs, 3 of them, faceless, nameless, floating slightly off the ground because they never bothered animating. Walk cycles. "He's still running," said the one made of post-its. "I thought we removed him," replied the one with Todo written across their chest. "No," whispered the third, who wore a crown of expired devlogs. "He removed himself from the player queue. He broke containment." Gerald stepped forward, bone boots clacking on the floor made of failed updates. "I just want to stop clicking," he said. The devs stared, then turned to each other, then back to him. "Have you tried turning yourself off and on again?" That's when Gerald realized he didn't want to stop. He couldn't stop. He was the click, a walking patch note, a balancing issue turned flesh, a perpetual feedback loop. His aura flickered with unspent upgrade points. His breath smelled like auto-generated shop items, and deep within his skull, a timer ticked down to a reward that would never arrive. "You can't delete me," Gerald muttered, "because if you do, the players will notice." The devs shuddered. One of them opened a settings menu, then immediately closed it again. "You're right," they said. "You're too integrated." And just like that, the devs alt-tabbed themselves out of existence. Gerald stood alone in the lost server, except now it wasn't a beta test zone, it was cozy. The cursed enemies had become old friends. The hairless goblin cube was baking cookies. Click Horror B was working on a poetry zine. And Gerald? He sat down in a chair made of cooldowns and rested, but not truly, because somewhere a player would log in again. A player who hadn't upgraded Bonefist in years. A curious child, a nostalgic adult, and Gerald would awaken, clicking, grinding forever. But we're not there yet. We have one more click left, one more part to go. Gerald sat at the edge of the final update, feet dangling off the changelog. He was tired in the way only idle characters can be, worn smooth by time, looped to perfection, caught in the rhythm of a grind that stopped pretending it had a goal. Around him floated old UI elements, buttons removed years ago, tooltips that led nowhere, achievements never implemented, still sparkling with the hope of being noticed. He picked one out of the air. "Congratulations, you have unlocked nothing." It felt accurate. Down below in the real game, players still clicked, still summoned Gerald, upgraded him, respected him, then forgot him as soon as someone shinier came along. But Gerald didn't mind. He'd grown out of ambition. He'd outlived purpose, and somewhere in the memory stack, behind a half-coded leaderboard, he kept a little journal. Each entry started the same. Another click, another day, still here, still me. Some pages were written in ASCII, some in emoji, one in nothing but 404 errors. But the last page, the one he wrote now, was different. He paused, hovering over it, thought, then scrawled in the flickering ink of a memory leak. "I was never meant to last, but I outlasted all the reasons I wasn't meant to, and that's something." He closed the journal, let it float into the void like a bug report never sent. The lights began to dim, not in sadness, but in closure. The cursed beta server shut itself down, softly. No fanfare, just a single, polite pop-up. "Gerald Bonefist has logged off. Thank you for playing." And in that moment, at the quiet, cosmic edge of what never had an edge, Gerald smiled. Not because he was free, but because he understood. Every game ends eventually. But the stories we whisper inside them, those weird, forgotten little tales we spin out of bugs, glitches, and background NPCs, they don't. They drift, they echo, they keep clicking. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, someone falls asleep listening. The end. Gerald Bonefist will return. In your dreams and in patch notes that no one reads. Sweet dreams. Clicker.